am an endangered species, but I sing no victim song. I am a woman. I am an artist. And I know where my voice belongs. Thank you again for this lovely invitation to be with you in BIPOC Voices. And I have a lot to share with you today. My heart is really full. I'm just back, my wife and I, from what we called a week-long civil rights road trip. We left from Charlotte, North Carolina, and drove into Atlanta and Tuskegee and Montgomery and Selma, Birmingham, and back to Atlanta. And I want to share some of the experiences with you. And, you know, a lot of you know that my work centers around the Mindful of Race Institute, the training that I'm doing that intersects racial awareness with mindfulness principles that support us in transforming our kind of racial conditioning in service to all beings, if you will. And this journey we had planned to take back before COVID kicked in. And so it's been a long time coming, and the desire to just visit the museums, especially in Montgomery, was really big in our hearts, and very much, to me, a journey to be on sacred ground, to know more deeply an area of the country that my people left running for their lives to where I am now, which feels like a bit of a returning to more deeply understand what was and what is, right? Now, and how this affects practice, these precious teachings that we're all involved in, these liberative teachings. So I just want to share a bit of this journey and how I was impacted by it, and the invitation that I think it brings to well-being overall, especially in these bodies of color. So the first stop was in Atlanta, and we stayed overnight, drove through Spartansburg, and was welcomed by a Confederate flag blowing in the wind. So just the greeting of all of that. And in Atlanta, we spent some time in an amazing botanical garden that had an orchid exhibit. And I shared this piece because we started in this brilliant place of nature and color and earth and diversity and exquisiteness, and the showing of how so many different colors and expressions can coexist in beauty. And that was kind of like the first stop to be reminded of just the abundance of our nature, which in my mind is beauty and exquisite and distinct. um, and belongs here, right? So there was that element. Visited Tuskegee, went to Selma and crossed the bridge, learned about more intimately the history of Bloody Sunday. And but the biggest place of profoundness for me on this trip was in Montgomery. And some of you have probably been on this trip, so you'll probably be able to really know what I'm talking about. I think leaving for this trip, I expected my heart to be broken and opened. But you think you know something, just like being in this practice, you learn about something, you hear it on some level. And as you practice more and more, or as you age, maybe more and more, or as you stay close to your aspiration to more deeply understand, connect, and heal, you find yourself recycling in ways where you're visiting similar places you're visiting knowing, but with different understanding. And that's what it was like to be there. The context of this history was so palpable and vivid in the current life that I live and so many of us live. So at this Legacy Museum was a journey. The museum is set up as a journey from enslavement to mass incarceration. And I think what it does most profoundly is show us how the past is still present. And even more deeply, not only does it show like the journey of my people, if you will, it shows the systems that are in place that perpetuate the structure, the skeletal shape of racism in this country and in its foundation. So this was just very palpable. It was truly an immersive experience to be in this Legacy Museum. You might even call it a concentration practice, but not the kind of concentration practice where you are, dissolving, but more you are in the belly, right? I mean, you are just so in the body of the lived experiences of Black bodies. Just imagine this is an 11,000 square foot construction, if you will, as part of the Equal Justice Initiative. It's located on the site of a former warehouse where Black people were forced to labor in Montgomery. And it was this exquisite, visceral, highly stimulating, high-tech, savvy kind of layout. And the layout of the building there wasn't anything linear about it. So to be in it was to really kind of lose yourself and to surrender to all of the stimuli that was coming at you and be held in this construction, this layout. So there were times when I felt lost moving through this. Does this sound familiar? Sometimes it feels this way in our practice, right? I felt lost and like, where the hell am I? And what just happened? And it's like when I go home to my family and everybody's talking at the same time, but we understand everything that's being said. So that kind of immersion, that kind of full-bodied experience happening all around you, above you, below you, inside of you. So you were really in, you were really in an immersive form of stimulated concentration. And the first scene you walk into is this ocean where you're in this room as large of maybe like a 3,000 square foot entry where you enter, and what you see projected on the wall are just waves of the ocean and the sound of the ocean, right? So you are walking into the slave ship and you are on the ocean. There's no slave ship that you see, but you are feeling the waves that are just moving the whole time that you are in this room, and it's surrounding you. So it's surround sound, surround waves, and you're in it. And that was so utterly profound as a entryway, a gateway of moving through this experience. And then you entered a room where there were just lines and lines of sculpted images of us being at the belly of the ocean, understanding that some of us didn't survive this journey. Many of us are at the base of the ocean, the belly of the ocean, and all of these different expressions and people, and some of them still in shackled gear, and pregnant and young kids and older people, just all right there. So you walk through what feels like a very long stretch to remind you of just the sacrifices, if you will. Some people might have been thrown over, some people might have been jumped. I mean, who knows? We can only imagine what those stories are, right? But you're in this experience as you move through it. There was so much to say about it, but there was one room that looked like it might have been around 4 stories high, and it exhibited all of the different artists and poets and sages and songwriters and amazing creatives that were plastered on the wall, and some of their poetry or the sounds of the music was playing, and you were in this setting of what felt like a massive expression of creativity that was also a part of this journey. This beauty and creativity is just everywhere of what was made out of nothing, right? What was not made out of nothing, but what was just created out of the gut of such horrific times. And so you had this offering that was there. And then there was a section that you moved into where you saw all of these white leaders back in the time, and the mindset that they had. So there were their pictures and the year and their statement, their political statement, if you will. So we're talking about senators and governors and presidents and what have you. And so you can see the context of which a lot of this activity was also existing in, or the mental structures that was governing the lives. And I mean, you know, some of you already know this, but it was just right there in the thick of everything else. And for example, there was this Olin D. Johnson. I came home and did some research on some of these folks, and who served as a governor and a U.S. senator in South Carolina, who served for over 40 years. He died in 1965, so this is not so long ago. And one of the things was, his statement was, I don't run from niggas, but I run them from me. And this was the sentiment. What I learned about this person was that they had 3 children, and one of them continued into politics. So this was kind of a mindset there back. This is 1965, was when he died. He was 69 years old. There was a woman, J.E. Andrews, who was the president of the Women's National Association for the Preservation of the White Race. This is out of Georgia. And her statement was, all we need to do is to insist that the Negro get back in line. And this was a mindset. This was a belief system. This probably had majority vote back there. We might even think about how this lives today. So that was another statement. Another one was Eugene Bull Connors, died at 76 in 1973. The police chief in Birmingham, Alabama at the time of Bloody Sunday. And his statement was, all you have to do is tell them you're going to bring the dogs, right? Let them run. I want to see the dogs work. He had a wife, he had 2 children, and so on and so on. And why, there were walls of these statements lined up, so that you can see the context, or if you will, the structure that surrounded and maintained this legacy from slavery to mass incarceration. Vivid, palpable. Now, the reason I mentioned the children is because I think so much of this speaks to legacy. It speaks to the legacy, the racial conditioning that was embedded in the family system and passed on, inherited and passed on, whether consciously or unconsciously. We all got some hit of a racial conditioning and inheritance that we received and continue to work with and make sense out of. But this was to understand racism is to understand power and structures, not just biases, but the systems that insist that it maintains itself, the systems that insist that there is on the stigma of inferiority that gets projected onto classes and colored folks is a part of our history. And if you look at how things are right now in the world, we see this nationwide insistence on, now we got woke mob conversations and removing books and penalizing teachers for speaking critically about our racial history and teaching people how to think for themselves around these issues. This is still we're still dealing with the generational pass down of this kind of mindset through the systems that are in place that keep it there. So this was a powerful journey to walk through. There was a section in the museum where you could walk to a booth, just rows and rows of people, like the scenes in the when you go to visit somebody in jail and you're in this booth and there's a glass and you pick up a phone and they pick up a phone. So you got to sit in front of a booth, and the minute you sat down, a person on the other end could pick up the phone and talk to you. And this is all technology. It wasn't like a real person back there. And they told you their story of how they got there, and they thanked you for listening. And you went from one to the next, just hearing these different stories. And these were real stories of people that were put into this. So you get this sense of then and now, and, you leave this exhibit feeling a deep hit on, who you are, how you got here, what you're grateful for, and what is your responsibility? I mean, that's where it left me. And how do I elevate this momentum in ways that we're not killing ourselves or being killed, for that matter? And if that wasn't riveting enough, there was a leaving there and going to the National Memorial for Peace and Justice. And this is often referred to as the Lynching Museum. We're talking 4,400 African American men, women, children were hanged, burned, shot, drowned, beaten by white mobs. And this is the memorial for that grave loss. It's a sacred space for truth-telling and reflection about racial terror in America. And it's a legacy memorial that covers a period from 1877 to 1950. So we're talking 800 steel monuments bearing the names of those lynched. And it's organized, the monuments are organized by state, by county, and it includes the names and dates of the people that we know of who were killed. And this massive structure covers 6 acres of land. And what was very powerful about this exhibit is the stillness of it, the quietness of it, but the journey of it is graduated in the sense that you start on an even ground and you find yourself at some point underneath the monuments, looking up, and you are reading meanwhile the stories of some of the people as you walk through. What's amazing for both of these structures is the love and care that went into creating them for our learning, for our remembrance, and for to really appreciate our lives is kind of how I felt. And at the end of this memorial was another garden, and I thought this was fascinating to end up in a garden where I can see some amazing flowers like I did in Atlanta, and be reminded of how beauty and horror oftentimes coexist together. So this was like a full circle kind of experience. And I spent some time in this reflection garden because that's almost all you could do at the end of this exhibit, was to just park yourself and rest, and to realize that you actually needed rest, because there was a certain kind of holding that was occurring as I journeyed through this. And I was reminded of my people and just imagining the holding that they must have experienced crossing that ocean. African people didn't have the Dharma per se, but they had something quite astounding, something I could feel when I moved through these exhibits, something real and wordless that was brought and born to life in me as I moved through. I'm not sure how they did what they did. I can only imagine the sacrifices and all that got me here in this seat to be able to be talking about it, right? I don't know what made them endure, but they had something that I feel like I need today, something that reminds me what I'm made of, something that supports me in sitting up straight with a strong core, this remembrance of the journey, and this baptism into the truth that was then and now. And I was reminded of the paramis. In our teachings, we have the paramis. We have the 10 paramis, which are heart and mind practices that when ripened, or as they're being ripened, they help us cross the floods of life. And the term floods is used in our tradition, which I find fascinating because there were floods that got us all here. And these paramis are powerful to sit in a garden and reflect on, right? To contemplate with regularity, and to be actually a practice for us. The paramis of generosity, moral integrity, renunciation. I'm thinking of this journey, this Black journey here. The parami of generosity might have been just the bare bones of the choice to live, right? The choice to keep living, and what went into making sure that that happened, so that the babies could come, so that I could be sitting here. The moral integrity might have looked more like the unfathomable faith that they must have had in what, I'm not sure, but the faith that they must have held on to in those darkest of times. Maybe that wasn't the word that they used. We had traditions, religions, ways of being in the world before we got to this land. So whatever that was that supported that kind of endurance and stamina and clarity, this is what I would refer to as a parami of moral integrity. The renunciation, the endurance and the energy required, which are all paramis. I'm thinking of just the renunciation that may not have been conscious so much, but the renunciation of abandoning, having to abandon physical freedom on every level imaginable, right? Just think about that, where that's just the norm, where there is surveillance, there's observation, there's no freaking room for error, ever. The penalties were high. So I think this notion that abandoning physical freedom is not something we want to do, but I'm thinking just living with the fact of that had to be quite a practice of endurance, bringing new meaning to the word tolerance and patience, right? The determination to keep going when so much was stolen, so much was taken from you, right? The equanimity, the choice to stay centered to some degree, to hold yourself together because you knew the risk of doing something otherwise. The wisdom to know the difference of when to bid or when to pass or when to run or when to stay. All of that to me represents a certain kind of parami for that time, right? So the Black body journey in my mind, looking at this experience of deep reverence and being in these profound teaching engines of these two museums, it teaches us a lot about suffering, endurance, resilience, and love. I'm absolutely stunned that we're still here, to be honest with you. I'm humbled because it took all of them for me to be here. And I'm grateful, so utterly grateful for their survival, their resilience, and how much all of that supported a sense of the meaning of freedom to me here and now. And I don't know if I could have done what they did, but it is something to think about when we look at our lives as practitioners in the Dharma seed, as in communities of other colored bodies that have had not this journey, but journeys that brought us here to this seat of contemplation. I just want to invite you to reflect a moment, if you would, to just turn your attention inward. Just take a moment here and see if you can notice what's happening in your heart and mind right now as I'm gushing on this trip. Just notice how it's landing on you. Notice what's happening in the body. Notice your breath. See if you can allow your breath to be free, your body to soften a little. And just take a moment to reflect with reverence on your family lineage. And it's okay if you don't know all the specifics, but just feel into the fact that there is lineage, that you're a part of a chain of events. And just take a moment to reflect on the strengths that you inherited. And perhaps the paramis that you inherited. You might even add one or two more paramis to the list. And as you bring to mind, perhaps right now, what flood are you crossing right now in your life? And what paramis can you ripen to support you? So when you're ready, you can come back and be with me again. So this journey continued. We left Montgomery and drove up to Birmingham and spent the night. But on the way, I was driving. And, Birmingham's about an hour and a half from Montgomery. And, you know, my wife and I are just full of, you know, reflecting on this experience and everything. And the next thing I know is we are pulled over by the police. And I mean, there were like 3 police cars swarming in. We didn't know what hit us, you know. So this one woman comes up on my side, and then a man comes on my wife's side and was kind of standing there. All of these are white people that we can see. And the woman says that I ran a red light. This is downtown by the Birmingham University, and it was on a Sunday, so it was really empty. And I'm pretty sure I didn't run a red light, but okay, I might have. I don't know. It's not like me, but then this was not like a normal time, right? So she asked me for my, and I said, I don't think I ran a red light. She says, you ran a red light. And so there was some leaning in. And it's like, okay. So she asked for my driver's license and the registration. And I couldn't find my license, but it was there all the time. Thank goodness for my wife, because she was a lot more grounded than I was in that moment. Handed me the license. They asked for I couldn't find the registration, but it was in right where it always is. I just couldn't see it. I was stunned at how how traumatized I was in that moment. And I'm kind of like well practiced, okay? So I could not believe. I mean, I was like really unglued a bit with this experience and this surrounding and you know, this swooping in, and just the terror of it and surveillance. And I mean, I was flooded with all these thoughts and emotions. And she was wrong, of course. And sometimes people like us can, you know, I mean, we can be dead right in their wrongness. So it's not a time to do anything kind of unwise. But I was so surprised how unglued I really was. And I think we walk with this, a lot of us, and are surprised by it at times, right? Um, and the good news is that I felt like I could get back in my seat fairly quickly. The bed and breakfast we were staying at was right around the corner. And by the way, they had a nice garden in the backyard. So I was able to get on the dirt again and look at a unique flower and bring myself back into center. But it's like, there it was, right in a freaking second of time. This kind of run through of the nervous system that gets ignited in the innocence and ignorance of any given moment. This sense of then and now, or I'm practiced and I'm beyond that versus no, I'm not, I'm right in it, was just really something. I was so grateful to have the practice because I felt like it was still carrying me to in a large way. But there it was. I was just so stunned. I ended up getting a warning for the ticket and told to be a good little girl and to follow the rules. And here I am, a grown ass woman, old enough to be their grandmothers, right? And but it was okay. I just felt like, wow, this is how it happens. I'm right here in the center of the system, the discretion they have to do whatever that they do, and to yeah. So this was in Birmingham. We left the next morning and then joined two of my sisters in Atlanta. And in Atlanta, we giggled a lot and we were in this joyous place of being with family, with kinfolks, with our people who knew what the hell was going on and what the game was. And we didn't even have to go there. We could just enjoy each other's company. And what I felt was the power of Sangha in being with my family and being with their joy and celebrating their joy and our joy together. And this journey, so there was so much more vivid than it was 3 months ago, maybe when I saw them, because I had had this kind of immersion, this kind of concentrated practice of being with our history in this more intimate and vivid way. It was so much preciousness there, so much tenderness. And I was reminded of the Bodhisattva, this walk. When we were in Atlanta and with my two sisters that joined us, and there were some other family members there, we went to the Martin Luther King Jr. Historic park. And Coretta Scott King is on a mural there. And what was powerful about that was it reads, "People who think nonviolence is easy don't realize that it's a spiritual discipline that requires a great deal of strength, growth, and purging of the self so that one can overcome almost any obstacle for the good of all without solely being concerned about one's own welfare." And I thought that was very much like the walk of the Bodhisattva, which is part of our tradition, which is really an offering for us to walk in the world with hearts, with these paramis, right? And with an understanding that the reason we're doing this is so that the heart is wise and understanding of a bigger picture, something larger than our own self-interest. It seems to me when I look back on this journey through these memorials that my people were so utterly unselfish, right? So utterly kind to be able to just endure a journey like that. So it shows this idea of walking through life as racial beings, which we are, to me speaks to part of my life's work and devotion, which is to be in this practice in a deep way, but also understanding our history and how we're conditioned to be in relationship to race and racism. And how do we do that as bodhisattvas? You know, in our tradition, we're given the bones of the Dharma, and I think we have to add our flesh of life to that, to the bones. So I think we have to talk about race. We have to engage our conditioning around how we're habituated, how we're conditioned, how we're imprisoned. We need to do that. And I also think we need to understand systems, understand context, understand the structures that are in place that impact collective mobility and freedom in our social realm, in our human realm. And it affects our capacity to love, our capacity to connect with ourselves, with our families, and our relationship, and with the world. I think one of the powerful medicines of being in affinity groups is that we learn how to be in the world, that we learn how to use each other to illuminate a certain infrastructure or understanding of how we've been conditioned so that we can show up anywhere we want to be in the world with less and less constriction, or with more heartfulness. Not that we have to be in a kumbaya relationship with people, but we understand that a lot of our freedom has to do with whether our heart is open or closed. And that's a big part of what I was aware of moving through the journey of these museums, just where there was collapse, where there was openness, and how quick I could kind of care for myself while I was walking through a true hell realm that was this complexity of both beauty and horror. So yeah, I'm just really grateful more than anything else, and I'm hopeful that there are ways that we can free ourselves, because we know our history so deeply and so intimately that it affects how we are with each other and how we are in the world. And I think when we are devoted to the paramis, or to our practices of heartfulness, and to our understanding of the contexts we're in, whether it's political, social, environmental, whatever it is, these structures that are in place that are oppressive and hateful, that it is, you know, we understand our role in both understanding that and in responding in ways that are planting seeds that support wholeness. So maybe I've said enough for now, and we can take a few minutes for maybe one or two questions or comments you might have about your practice. So it might just take a minute, just 1 minute. Maya Angelou, and Still I Rise. Isn't that good medicine? I mean, really. I mean, so she says, you may write me down in history with your bitter, twisted lies. You may trode me in the very dirt, but still, like dust, I rise. Does my sassiness upset you? Why are you beset with gloom? 'Cause I walk like I'm gold. I've got gold oil wells pumping in my living room. Just like moons and like suns, with the certainty of tides. Just like hopes springing high, still I rise. Do you want to see me broken? Bowed head and lowered eyes, shoulders hanging down like teardrops, weakened by my soulful cries? Does my hauntiness offend you? Don't you take it awfully hard, 'cause I laugh like I've got gold mines digging in my own backyard. You may shoot me with your words, you may cut me with your eyes, you may kill me with your hatefulness, but still, like air, I rise. Does my sexiness upset you? Does it come as a surprise that I dance like I've got diamonds at the meeting of my thighs? Out of the huts of history's shame, I rise. Up from a past that's rooted in pain, I rise. I'm a black ocean, leaping and wide, welling and swelling, I bear in the tide. Leaving behind the night of terror and fear, I rise. Into a daybreak that's wondrously clear, I rise. Bringing the gift that my ancestors gave, I am the dream and the hope of the slave. I rise, I rise, I rise. I rise,